U.S. companies are being barred from exporting goods and services to Chinese telecom manufacturer ZTE for 7 years. What's behind this draconian ban and what could be the likely fallout? And in Saudi Arabia, cinemas are being finally reopened, or should I say being finally opened after 35 years. What has prompted this change in policy, and will it change the social fabric? Welcome to The Point. Live from Beijing, I'm Li Xin. U.S. Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, voted Tuesday to ban U.S. companies from using federal money to buy equipment from companies causing national security concerns. The move came just days after Chinese telecom equipment maker ZTE was severely punished for violating a previous settlement of criminal and civil charges for making illegal shipments to Iran and North Korea. Based in Shenzhen, southern China, ZTE is a leading global provider of telecom equipment, networking solutions, and one of the world's fastest-growing smartphone manufacturers. The company pleaded guilty in March 2017 to conspiring to unlawfully export, obstruction of justice, and making a false statement, and was hit with nearly $1.2 billion in fines. This was the largest fine and forfeiture ever levied in an export control case. But U.S. Commerce Department investigators said the company made additional false statements multiple times about having taken actions against the employees responsible when they had not. Meanwhile, UK phone companies have also been warned to stay clear of ZTE over security concerns. So what could be behind these tough measures, and what is the likely fallout from all of this? Joining me from UK is Mike Basten, a senior lecturer at the University of Southampton, and here in Beijing, John Gong, professor of economics at the University of International Business and Economics. Gentlemen, good to have you on the show. Professor Gong, ZTE faces tough actions due to the ban on buying Qualcomm's processors and modems, the main components in smartphones. So how serious is the situation for the company?
Yeah, this is a very, very serious situation. I think the company is right now on shaky ground. ZTE's business in the U.S. Is mostly consists of two parts: the infrastructure business as well as the CPE, the consumer process equipment, which is the smartphone they're selling quite well. I think this action from the Department of Commerce will hit very hard on companies' smartphone business. It uses two very important chips from Qualcomm, which one is the baseband RF chip, radio frequency chip, as well as the processor chip. And these products currently don't have a clear substitute from other places, and I think, Huawei has a chip of its own, but it only substitutes for some of the phones ZTE are selling. So I think it is a very serious situation, and I think they really have to find a solution. Probably, I think my suggestion is that the Chinese government should step in. Look, this company has a serious problem. As you can see, lies after lies, obstruction of justice. So there's something wrong with the company. There got to be somebody responsible for this, and I think, and my suggestion and my advice to the Chinese government is just to take actions and step in, take over the company.
We'll talk about the reaction and the stance of the Chinese government in just a moment. Mr. Basten, now ZTE, which sells smartphones in the U.S., paid $890 million in fines and penalties, with an additional penalty of $300 million that could be imposed. So why still the ban by the FCC after such heavy fines already?
Well, specifically, and the rhetoric coming from the Americans points at the additional penalties, which include sacking 4 senior employees and, crucially, penalizing by either eliminating or reducing the bonuses of a further 35 employees. And ZTE have publicly admitted that they haven't done that with these 35 additional employees, and that's behind the American the reasoning on the American side. So I agree with your panelists. I think this is very, very urgent. It could lead to a far wider escalation of tit-for-tat trade sanctions, and I think the governments really need to get involved, and it could be that ZTE actually have to implement the penalties on these 35 employees, do that as a gesture of goodwill as soon as possible.
Right, John, explain to us the significance of the FCC voting. We know it's 5-0, although it could be voted the second time to be finalized. But how significant is that move to ban U.S. companies receiving federal money to buy equipment from companies, although they didn't name names, but what does that mean?
Well, if you know, I think the ZTE incident itself is probably too early to say this is related to the Sino-U.S. trade spat, at least not until March of 2017. March 2017, I'm sorry. But this FCC decision to impose this ruling on rural telephone companies, which are the most beneficiaries of the Universal Service Fund, they're receiving federal money from Washington to buy telecom equipment, that itself smacks every little bit of Sino trade war. This is a very political decision. This has nothing to do with, alleged. I'm very doubtful of any national security concern here. We're talking about base stations, switches, and these equipment are used all over the world. And if this is really a national security concern, why doesn't Washington come out and say, look, we're just going to ban these equipment altogether? Only those carriers using federal money to buy these equipment, and only for these companies they have a ruling like this. So it just doesn't stand the test of a national security concern.
It smells fishy.
Yeah.
Let's take a listen to what the spokesperson for China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs had to say about the punishment on ZTE.
The U.S. action is typical unilateralism and economic hegemony. China and the U.S. are both major countries in the world, and their economies are highly integrated. The two sides should seek win-win cooperation through mutual respect. If the United States insists on moving against the tide, we will take decisive measures and win the battle for multilateralism and free trade.
Okay, I'm going to ask John here again, because this really has to do with understanding the Chinese position here. So she used the words such as unilateralism and economic hegemony. We do not know the whole picture, right, exactly what happened, but it can be said that ZTE definitely did something wrong. So what is the Chinese government trying to say here? Are they trying to protect ZTE, or are they trying to call out for something else that they think is missing here?
Well, my opinion is that this is more than just ZTE. I mean, this sends a very strong signal to the U.S. government that let's restrict this thing to the ZTE itself, not let's fester this into a political movement. It's just simply not correct. It's just simply not right to me for the the leaders of the U.S. intelligence office standing in the Senate testifying and answering this question. Are you going to use a phone from China? Well, I'm not going to use it. Doesn't say why they don't want to use it. This is totally unnecessary. I mean, there's no clear evidence that these phones are actually being used for any sort of intelligence purposes. I mean, think about the scenario when the Chinese government calls upon the leaders of our intelligence community standing in front of Congress, asking the same question. Are you going to use the phones from Apple, from Samsung? Of course they're going to say no, right? So, but this sends a very strong signal to the American people that don't use the phone. And this is politics. And this is every bit of furthering up a trade war with China.
Yeah, Mr. Basten, the British cybersecurity officials have also reportedly warned UK phone carriers to stay clear of ZTE's equipment and services, citing concerns that Beijing could force the company to help it infiltrate or sabotage the telecoms infrastructure in that country. How much is this likely to have been as a result of the American pressure, or do you believe it is simply coincidence?
I think it's probably the former. I think it's probably American pressure and the British government trying to pally up to the Americans, which is, again, very unhelpful and a very, very negative mood. And I think what the Chinese government could be doing here is highlighting the damage that this will do to the American economy, ironically, and American consumers and American companies. If this ban is implemented strictly, prices inevitably will go up, choice will be restricted, and American companies and American consumers will be paying up a heavy price themselves. So it really has a very, very internecine effect generally.
Well, China's Ministry of Commerce responded also very swiftly Tuesday morning, and they announced that it will take necessary measures to protect the legitimate interests of local companies. So, John, what kind of measures do you think that could be included in case these U.S. punishment and the ban really go ahead?
I think, first of all, they're going to start negotiation with the U.S. government, saying that this is an isolated event. You can't let this fester into other areas. Second, I think they're going to take actions to sort of protect ZTE as a company. We want to still maintain this company, make this company still survive. I think this is a very serious situation. This company is on very shaky ground. And probably other measures that to help corporate China to maintain and succeed their business in the U.S. I want to make a point here. I think this is a very dangerous point, up to the point that sometimes it can be sort of out of control from the government. Once this trade war spat, even the rhetoric of trade war spat starts to fester and flare up. Just imagine, in a few days, someone from China will come out and smash an Apple phone and say, we're going to boycott Apple phones. And on the U.S. side, they're going to do something similar. And then this thing will spread into...
Out of control.
Out of control. It will spread into other products. Chinese customers are going to boycott, KFC, Starbucks, and the U.S. are going to do this and do that. So this is going to be really, really dangerous. So I think both sides, leaders of both sides, should really cool down and think about the future of our economy. Both sides' interests.
I definitely hope this is not going to heat up like that. But Mr. Basten, the timing is also very interesting, because the 7 years ban, if it is implemented in time, then it will directly bring us to 2025, which is the designated deadline of the Chinese government initiative to upgrade its industry by increasing the domestic content of core materials. That is called Made in China 2025. Do you think there is a coincidence there that the ban is to last till that year? And if so, what really is going on? Are we talking about a trade war, or are we talking about a technology war in some people's eyes?
I think it's the latter. I don't think it's coincidence. I think the Americans are genuinely worried that their sort of leadership of the world economy is under threat, being usurped by the Chinese, and they see Chinese high-tech industry developing so quickly and so effectively internationally. Huawei, ZTE, Lenovo, to name but few, also Tencent and WeChat. So I think it's a technology war. It's very much about the balance of power across the world economy, and I think those 7 years has been deliberately set to challenge the further emergence of Chinese high technology sector. But again, I think that the ray of hope here comes from, I think, the American people. I think the American people will turn against this government, will turn against the Trump administration. There are midterm elections, November the 6th this year, not very far away, and hopefully those will prove decisive, and some of these Republican senators who are behind this, very xenophobic indeed, will be voted out of office.
We do not know that. We definitely cannot count on that kind of possibility. But John here, is there a silver lining to this? Very quickly, please. I
think so. I think our gentleman from UK said hit the nail right on the head. The U.S. side is very concerned about the innovation capability of China. They actually have a term called innovation mercantilism, thinking that corporate China's innovation success is mostly driven by the government's policies, industrial policies, and state subsidies, stuff like that. But I think the truth cannot be further from that. Chinese companies succeeding on the international stage are mostly private companies. They are indigenous from day one. They have developed their technological process by themselves. So I think they are climbing the wrong tree.
Well, a lot has to be learned from this case, I guess, from both sides. Many thanks to my two guests, Mike Basten, Senior Lecturer at the University of Southampton, and John Gong, Professor of Economics at the University of International Business and Economics. You're watching The Point. We'll be back right after this. Stay with us. Saudi Arabia's first cinema in 35 years opened its door to the public in Riyadh earlier Wednesday, and Marvel superhero movie The Black Panther is the first movie to be shown. According to the country's Ministry of Culture and Information, cinemas will create more than 30,000 full-time jobs in addition to 130,000 part-time jobs by the year 2030. And the contribution of the cinema sector to the GDP will be over $24 billion. Now, this is the latest move in a series of social reforms in a bid to fulfill Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's Vision 2030. So what's behind the lifting of the cinema ban, and how far will these social reforms go? I'm joined by Naja Al-Utaibi, a senior analyst at the Arabia Foundation, and here in the studio by Xu Qingduo, a current affairs commentator, and the warmest welcome to all of you. So let me go to Naja Al-Utaibi in London first here. Now, cinemas have been banned in Saudi Arabia for 35 years. What prompted the Crown Prince to make this change of policy in your eyes?
Well, as you said, this is one of a series of changes that the new leadership in Saudi Arabia try to implement. There are many motivations behind it. I will always think about economy, because the Saudi people spend more than $30 billion a year abroad in neighboring countries such as Dubai or Bahrain, and to just have a good time and watch films and attend public cinemas. So the Saudi government, they thought, this amount of money, why they can't invest it in the country, especially that since the new leadership came to power, they wanted to diversify the economy. So they wanted to generate and create more resources of economy to stop the country from depending on oil. And one way of doing that is to open the entertainment and tourism industry. So this is one of the motivations. But other motivations, like you said, is creating more jobs. Saudi Arabia, although it's a rich country,
we'll talk about that in just a moment.
Unemployment rate.
Yeah, we'll talk about that in just a moment. Qingduo, in your eyes, what is the significance of cinemas being reopened in Saudi Arabia?
I think this is a symbol of the effort by the Saudi government to modernize the country. That is, they want to provide the new image of a modern Islam in Saudi Arabia. They want to go back to the times before 1970s. So that at that time, of course, people are allowed to go to cinema, to the concert, to join the sports activities. This is, of course, you can interpret this latest move as from an economic sense, but also it's a part of efforts for modernizing Saudi Arabia, a country, to become just like in the 21st century. So they want to present a new image of this country.
Right. Naja Al-Utaibi in London, what kind of regulations or rules will there be for women who want to go to these cinemas? How much freedom will they have? Do you have any idea? From
what I have understood is that there won't be any restrictions. Of course, there will be securities, there will be rules against harassment, for example, but I don't think there will be some sort of like segregations between men and women, which used to be part of any system in Saudi Arabia, such as if you go to a restaurant in Saudi Arabia before, there will be like two sections for male and
so you're saying the male and female spectators will be mixed in the cinema. How significant is that in your eyes?
This is a big move in Saudi Arabia, but I know it's also part of the whole vision. The country wants to modernize the country and also remove some the old traditional religious system which used to control the country and used to control the social life before.
How big, in your understanding, how big has there been, has the opposition, let's say, been from the religious establishment towards such a bold step forward?
Many people in Saudi Arabia, especially the conservatives, they are not happy about the change. Some of them, they think it's very fast. Some of them, they think all these changes are un-Islamic, and it will change the face of Saudi Arabia. These people, they want to see Saudi Arabia traditional. They don't want to change. They want to keep the status quo. But I can assure you that the majority of people who are young people, they are very supportive, and they support this change and they are behind this vision and behind the Crown Prince and his reforming process.
These cinemas opening in Saudi Arabia are in fact owned by the government's sovereign wealth fund, the Public Investment Fund, in partnership with the international chain AMC, which is American Movie Classics. How will Qingduo, I don't know how much technical understanding you have on this issue, but I think it's a very interesting topic. How will the Saudi authorities deal with the so-called inappropriate images, such as bare arms or bottles of wine? Will those images just be pixelated out, as in the norm when watching films on a Saudi Arabian airline?
Yes, that's the belief. Moderate changes, costs will be made to make it more suitable to the country. I think that's also very smart. I wouldn't criticize such moves, because remember, this is a country with a population of 32 million people, but the majority of them are under the age of 30. Yes, all these moves are welcomed, are popular with the young generation, but still we talked about the opposition, the older generation. People are not used to these new changes. They want to remain unchanged in society. They are not happy with the changes. I think all the change in the direction is right, but then it's really about how and when to implement those changes. This technical stuff, sometimes it matters a lot.
The Saudi Arabian Ministry of Culture and Information has estimated the contribution of the cinema sector to its GDP to be over 24 billion, as I mentioned. So, Alo-Taubi, why does the government need this new sector, again, if you could elaborate from the job perspective, and as a country whose economy has been heavily reliant on oil, do you think the cinema section is able to generate enough jobs?
Yeah, definitely, especially for women. The Crown Prince is keen to encourage women and reduce this employment gap, because, especially amongst women, because more than 70%, the unemployment gap is among women 70%. Although women make up the majority of the university graduates. And the reason is that because women have limited jobs to apply for, so he has recently allowed them to apply for other jobs, such as working for military or working in restaurants, or in beauty salons, supermarkets, and the entertainment and tourism industry is also it's good for women, and also it will create a lot of jobs for them.
Do you think the cinemas can be profitable, Alo-Taubi, given the fact that, according to a 2014 survey, 2/3 of Saudi internet users watch a film online every week, and 9 out of 10 Saudis have smartphones? So will there be enough people going to cinema?
Like you said, a lot of people are technologically connected, and here in the UK we watch Netflix and Amazon. So in Saudi Arabia it's the opposite. We have just started opening cinemas, but it's never too late. And also this is a good sign, and a sign that there is a meaningful change happening. So a lot of people, they have welcomed it.
The clerics, let's mention again the religious establishment here. The clerics have been a major dissenter to cinemas. In 2017, the Grand Mufti was quoted as saying that cinemas might broadcast shameless and immoral films, and that cinemas would encourage the mixing of the sexes. So, Qingduo, despite the cinemas have reopened, as we are seeing now, does it show that the clerics now have much less influence than they once did, and what are the likely consequences?
Well, on the surface, that is the case. Basically, the government is taking all the decision-making power in their own hands. It used to be the clerics, the establishment, will rule about the social life, daily life of how people should behave, how people should go outside, things like that. But now the government is trying, basically, take that power back and to initiate this radical reform to modernize this country. But I think there's a hidden danger or the risk you can see. If you push all those radical reforms too fast, there will be accumulation of dislikes or hatred among the dissenters. Once there's opening of the prince or the government, if there's a vulnerability, that might be say the reverse or even attack from those conservative forces. That will be something a block in terms of this continuous reform of this country.
Right, Ms. Alatabi, do you share this concern? What my commentator here mentioned?
I do, but I understand that over the last few years, the religious establishments in Saudi Arabia, they don't have the same power like before. They can't influence the political decision making. And I can give you some examples. 2 years ago, the Crown Prince has reduced the power of the religious police, and this is...
I'm afraid we lost Alatabi there, and let me ask Qingduo here the last question on my mind. So does Saudi Arabia actually want a more liberal and secularized society, or the Crown Prince is just offering some degree of greater social freedom rather than greater political freedom?
I think that's the case. Many people are trying to figure out now the changes because there are some costs in terms of welfare, in terms of handouts from the government. Basically, the young people are encouraged to work in the private sector, to work harder, to make money, to make a living by yourself, instead of they used to do what is the life is like. They used to rely on the government too much, probably. Right now, they want to change the whole situation, but now they are not giving, some say they are not giving them a political freedom. They're giving them entertainment. Okay, go to the cinema, go to a sports event, feel happy and work hard, make a living.
Let's see how the situation develops. Many thanks to current affairs commentator Xu Qingduo, and earlier we were joined by Najat Alatabi, a senior analyst at the Arabia Foundation. Many thanks to her, although we lost the signal towards the end of the show. Anyway, thank you very much for watching this edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin. As always, you can follow me on Facebook and Twitter using the handle The Point with Alex. Download the application called CGTN to watch the show on your mobile devices, or go to YouTube and look for CGTN The Point. You've got the point.